The movie begins with a group of kids trying to steal a rover when they hear a noise. They immediately hid, and one of the kids, Caleb, took out the small container holding his late father's ashes. Once the men had passed by, the young individuals went back to stealing the rover when the alarm suddenly went off. In the year 2257, humans started living and working on the moon to mine for helium-3, while wealthier individuals relocated to an idyllic faraway planet called Omega. Caleb is one of the young individuals living in the lunar mining colony. When his father died and he was still underage, he was granted the opportunity to travel to Omega. But he is required to be cryogenically frozen, as the journey to Omega will take 75 years. This way, he'd still be the same age once he got to Omega, even after 75 years. But Caleb didn't want to go to Omega and leave his friends behind, especially since his friends would be dead by the time he reached the paradisal planet. But his friends wanted Caleb to go to Omega so he could have a better life. And before Caleb leaves the moon permanently, they decided to give him one last gift, something that he will remember and treasure for the rest of his life. When his father was still alive, he used to tell Caleb about the crater that he and Caleb's mom used to sneak away to before Caleb was born. His late father once told him that he was going to bring Caleb to the crater, just like he promised his late wife. But since his father died, Caleb couldn't do it anymore. His best friend, Dylan, decided that he'd be the one to bring Caleb to the crater, and it will serve as a memory Caleb can bring with him to Omega. One day, there was a warning about a meteor shower, and the colony would be on lockdown. And Caleb had to leave for Omega as soon as the lockdown was over. The group of friends was upset after learning how little time they had together. One of their friends, Marcus, asked if they were still going to go to the crater, and Dylan replied that they were going that night. They went to Caleb's room to prepare for everything they needed when they heard a knock on the door. They immediately hid everything to avoid suspicion, and Caleb opened the door. On the other side of the door was a man who handed Caleb the small container holding the ashes of Caleb's late father. They went to the cafeteria after their preparation, talking about how they could leave the colony without getting caught. Caleb asked Dylan how they were going to get out if they didn't have the access codes to the garage. Dylan told them that he was going to ask a girl named Addison Weaver for the access codes. Their other friend, Borny, didn't like the idea because he thinks Addison is weird. Addison just came up from the earth and didn't have any friends. But Dylan knew that the only way for them to get access codes was to ask Addison since her father is on science team. He approached Addison, who was all by herself, and tried starting a conversation, but the girl stood up from her seat and walked away from him. Dylan followed her, but Addison didn't want to talk to him because everyone in the colony thinks she's just a spoiled Earth girl, and the only time anyone talks to her is when they need something from her. She decided to listen to Dylan when the latter told her about Caleb leaving the colony forever. Moved by the beautiful friendship between the four boys, Addison agreed to give them the access codes, but on one condition: she'd come with them. Dylan told the others about Addison's condition, and Borny wanted to disagree but was persuaded to accept it after a while. And that's how we got back to the first scene in the movie. Caleb stared at the rover while the others panicked because of the loud alarm. He then pulled a wire from under the rover, and the alarm suddenly stopped. They went inside the rover, and Dylan drove towards the gates. He told Addison to enter the access code, but the girl didn't want to do it herself because she thought the others would drive away as soon as she opened the gates. So Caleb decided to do it himself. Addison told him the access code, and he stepped out of the rover to open the gates. He went back to the rover once he entered the access codes, and the group of 5 young individuals took in the sight of the moon outside the colony. Caleb remembered what his father told him. Road trips are one of the best things one could experience, especially when you go with the people you hold dear in your heart. When you go on a trip, you get to leave everything behind, including your problems. And wherever you go, you're free. You're the master of your own fate. Dylan drove with Caleb beside him to tell him the way to the crater, while the others were having fun at the back. They passed by the transport, and Caleb stared at it. Borny and Marcus stopped playing after a while, and Borny prepared Marcus pills for him. Marcus has a heart disease, and Borny always made sure that Marcus was taking his pills. Later on, Dylan called for everyone's attention, and they saw an abandoned castle-like colony. Caleb shared what his father told him. A long time ago, when the humans first started coming up to the moon, they started building on it, wanting to turn it into the paradise the people on Earth always dreamed of. But once they discovered planet Omega, the humans' goal changed, and they abandoned the supposedly utopian paradise they wanted to build on the moon. Addison told the boys about the Earth and things you can find on it that you can't find on the moon, like the weather. Addison was appalled that they knew nothing about the Earth and asked the boys if they had learned anything about it in school. Dylan answered that they never studied about Earth or any other planet, as the only thing the adults taught them was how to mine helium, so the rich individuals could have enough fuel to travel to Omega. And the only reason Caleb knew a little bit about the Earth is because his father grew up on it before he went to the lunar mining colony to become a laborer. The boys knew nothing about the Earth because they were born and raised in the colony, and their family has been in the colony for a really long time. Addison was confused because the laborers in the lunar mining colony are supposed to have a 20-year contract before they can finally go to Omega, but Caleb told her that the contract was a scam. The colony would lie about the contract, but every time a laborer gets sick, is late, or if their production is delayed in any way, they add more time to the contract, which makes it impossible for the workers to leave the colony, resulting in them living in the colony their whole lives. Marcus asked Addison if the sky on Earth was really blue, and he was so happy to know that it was. Addison then asked Caleb what was inside the crater and why it was so important for him to go there. Caleb didn't really know what was in the crater, and the only thing his father told him was that there is a brook that splits into two inside the crater. The teens put on their spacesuits so they could play around outside the rover. Addison told them about the game of baseball, but since there is no gravity on the moon, it wasn't exactly easy to play baseball there. So the boys decided to play a different game. Addison sat alone, tearing up as she looked at the Earth longingly. She got worried when she noticed the boys playing launch off, where they use an oxygen tank to launch towards space with a cable holding them back. Addison and Dylan got into an argument, but Addison soon relented and even joined the game. All of them were having fun until it was Borny's turn, and the cable suddenly snapped. He went flying into space, and Marcus took another oxygen tank so he could get Borny. Caleb and Dylan followed suit, while Addison stayed on the ground to serve as their eyes. Marcus managed to grab hold of Borny but was having a hard time controlling their speed. Dylan and Caleb used their own oxygen tanks to fly towards Borny and Marcus, and the four boys fell to the ground. Since they used up some of the oxygen tanks, they wouldn't be able to go to the crater without running out of it. Caleb told them about an outpost where they could find more oxygen tanks, and they decided to go there. Borny didn't want to go to the outpost because of the stories his brother told him about space ghosts in the outpost. And Dylan, who had enough of Borny's unrealistic stories, insulted Borny and his brother. The two got into a fight, but Caleb managed to stop them. Dylan and Borny apologized to each other, and they continued on their journey. They arrived at the outpost, and it was so dark inside. They cautiously walked, looking around using the only flashlight they had. They saw a mannequin and got scared, thinking it was really a space ghost, until the lights opened and Addison realized that they were in a model house, not an outpost. They searched around the model house when Dylan and Addison got into an argument. Dylan told Addison about his father, who didn't want to stay in the colony and sneaked into the shuttle so he could go back to Earth. Meanwhile, Marcus and Borny were searching together. They not only found the oxygen tanks, but they also found a bunch of frozen foods. The teens had a feast, and at night, they chatted around. Addison told them things about the Earth again. She opened up about her parents, who divorced each other. Not wanting to be in the same world as her father, Addison's mother took her 10-year-old brother with her to the transport towards Omega while her father went to the colony with Addison. While they were talking, Borny was messing around when he suddenly played a projection followed by music. The teens played around and messed with the model house, having fun together. When everyone was asleep, Caleb was still awake, staring into space. Addison sat beside him, and the two of them had a deep talk. Caleb told Addison about how he met Dylan and how they are much closer to each other. He asked Addison to always be with Dylan once he left. Addison put her head on his shoulders, and the two of them comforted each other. The next day, they left for the crater again. The rover broke down in the middle of the road, and Addison came up with a plan. She pushed down the button for the distress signal so the people in the colony could come get them. Since the colony is still in lockdown, they wouldn't send a rescue team until the lockdown is over. That would be enough time for the teens to go to the crater on foot and make it back to the rover before the rescue team got to them. They walked to the crater, with Caleb remembering what his father told him. His father made him promise to go to the crater no matter what and to look for the brook that splits into two. Caleb was confused at that time because his father was acting weird. They made it to the crater, and they went down to it. They approached the crater, and they saw a message on the wall. Marcus found the control for the door, and the teens entered the crater. Inside the crater was a lone dead tree. Nothing else but that. Caleb read a message on a stone when they noticed Addison tapping and caressing the wall. Addison smiled at them before opening a part of the wall where they saw a button. Addison pushed the button down, and the whole room transformed into a projection of a beautiful forest, showing them a glimpse of the Earth. The teens were happy, and Marcus was fixated on the blue skies. Caleb then approached a stone, and the room turned back to the empty room. While the other was confused at what happened, Caleb knelt down in front of a part of the floor that has a star carved on it. He opened it and saw a picture of his parents. Below the picture is the small container that holds the ashes of his late mother. He put his father's ashes beside his mother's and closed the floor again, taking only the picture with him. Caleb cried, admitting to his friends that he knew that his father's death wasn't an accident. His father knew about the benefits Caleb could get and sacrificed himself so Caleb could go to Omega. Caleb told his friends that he wanted to stay in the colony with them, but Dylan refused. They've lived a hard life in the colony, and Caleb's father did what he had to do to give his child a better life. Dylan wanted Caleb to take the opportunity his father opened up for him. Dylan told Caleb that if he went to the Omega, then they would be happy too. Because once he goes, a part of them will go with him. They're going to be very happy knowing that Caleb is living a good life and having more adventures in Omega. While they were talking, Marcus suddenly collapsed. His heart rate was way too low because the low gravity was affecting his blood pressure, and he couldn't take his pill because it was in the rover. The teens left the crater to go back to the rover when they saw a meteor shower. They tried to run as fast as they could to the rover while avoiding the meteors. The boys reached the rover, but Addison was left behind after almost getting hit by a meteor. Caleb and Dylan went to get her while Borny took Marcus inside the rover. He gave Marcus his pills and quickly closed Marcus' helmet again when the windshield broke. Meanwhile, Dylan was hit by a small meteor, and his helmet cracked. Caleb sealed the cracks before they completely broke, and they brought him back to the rover. Since the meteor shower was still happening, the rescue team would take a lot longer before they could get them. The teens stayed in the rover, patiently and worriedly waiting for the meteor shower to end. After a while, Addison, Marcus, and Borny were asleep when Dylan woke up. Despite the situation they were in, Caleb and Dylan talked and laughed until their helmets turned blue. Dylan lost consciousness again, and just seconds later, Caleb fainted too. The rescue team arrived and took them back to the colony. When Caleb woke up, he was already on planet Omega. He panicked when he realized that he wasn't able to say goodbye to his friends. But 75 years have passed, and all his friends are likely to have passed already. He was given a transmitter where Dylan left messages for him, always telling him everything that had happened within the 75 years that Caleb had been asleep. Addison yelled at her father to let them use the transmitter once a year. The boys and Addison grew older. Addison protested and demanded changes in the contract. After a while, her voice was heard, and the loopholes in the contract were finally closed. The four of them became successful. Dylan and Addison got married and formed a family together. Their road trip to the crater gave them the courage and hope to change their lives for the better. Everyone stayed happy for Caleb. And even when he left his friends behind, knowing that they passed away before he could even wake up, Caleb knew that he would always bring the memories of them with him forever. Caleb looked for Addison's younger brother. The boy already knew Caleb because Addison talked a lot about him on his own transmitter. The two formed a friendship. Caleb may have lost his friends forever, but he will carry them in his heart forever.